Anatsui, world-renowned African contemporary artist, was born in Ghana in 1944. El grew up in a large family in a predominantly agricultural and fishing area. His humble roots are not only shown through his work, but also through his quiet and thoughtful presence. In 1964, when he began his studies, many parts of Africa were experiencing a cultural renaissance associated with decolonization movements. Anatsui himself joined the unofficial Sankofa movement, which was invested in unearthing and reclaiming Africa's rich indigenous traditions and assimilating these with the European-influenced aspects of society. His earliest works, for example, included a series of wooden market trays into which he burned designs inspired by African graphic systems. Anatsui studied drawing, painting, and sculpture in the Western tradition at the College of Art in Kumasi, Ghana in 1969. He shortly moved to Nigeria in 1975 and began teaching at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. He currently holds the position of head of sculpture at UNN, and his influence upon young artists in Nigeria and elsewhere in West Africa has been profound. In some of his first mature works, he used an electric chainsaw to slash geometric patterns into wood. Though abstract, these works were metaphorically rich. Anatsui chose woods of different colors to represent the diversity of African cultures, while the violence of the chainsaw enacted the ruptures imposed by European imperialistic expansion. He uses found materials, aluminum bottle tops, and transforms them into layered surfaces of fabrics, color, and texture. The ordinary and everyday materials of consumerism and consumption, so readily discarded and forgotten, are reimagined as extraordinarily beautiful and sensate objects. Anatsui does not tell museums or curators how to install his artworks. This is pretty rare, as most artworks come with detailed instructions on how they should look. Here's what he had to say. Art is a reflection on life. Life isn't something we can cut and fix. It's always in a state of flux. But Lisa Binder, exhibition curator and curator of contemporary art at the Museum for African Art, had a different story. As a curator, that sounds amazing, but is actually terrifying to have no direction on how to install, she said. You're simultaneously grateful to El and ungrateful. Throughout his 40-year career, El always has used materials that are readily available. For example, he gets the liquor bottle caps for his woven metal sculptures from a local distillery in Nigeria. El uses recycled materials because he can't relate to oil paint from a tube, but believes that there is a link between himself and other people who have touched that piece. Old Man's Cloth, which was first hung in an exhibit in 2004, has been constructed from flattened liquor bottle labels that are collected near Anatsui's home in southern Nigeria. Anatsui's choice of discarded liquor bottle caps as a medium has as much to do with their formal properties as with their historical associations. As an African artist whose career was forged during the utopia of mid-century African independence movements, his work has always engaged his region's history and culture. The bottle caps for Anatsui signify a fraught history of trade between Africa and Europe. As he explained, alcohol was one of the commodities brought with Europeans to exchange for goods in Africa. Eventually, alcohol became one of the items used in the transatlantic slave trade. They made rum in the West Indies, took it to Liverpool, and then made its way back to Africa. He thought that the bottle caps had a strong reference to the history of Africa. The luminescent gold colors also recall the colonial past of Anatsui's home country. Modern Ghana was previously a British colony called the Gold Coast until its independence in 1957. The fluid moments of the work's surface remind us of the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, which carried slave ships and traders between Africa, Europe, and the New World. By bestowing his works with titles such as Man's Cloth and Women's Cloth, Anatsui also made reference to the significance of textiles in African societies and their own historical role in trade networks. In 2009, Anatsui displayed an untitled sculptural piece at the Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. It looks like fabric since textile was a very important part of Ghana's history. The kente cloth was the predominant textile of Ghana and is characterized by sharply defined shapes created by the technique of loom weaving. It is easier to weave geometric than organic shapes, so rectangles, diamonds, zigzags, and squares are predominant. The most used color in kente cloth is gold, which was associated with royalty in the Ghanaian culture and their control over the gold trade. Anatsui uses gold in this piece to give it that sense of royal reverence and authority. Like his other pieces, this one is pounded metal pieces held together by copper wire. The pieces are made from alcoholic beverages, which have a great significance of West Africa's past and their traditions. They honor their ancestors through libation. Libation is when they pour a few drops of their drink upon the ground before drinking, as either an offering to a deity or, in this case, to remember their ancestors. Non-fixed forms is a key concept for Anatsui. The best demonstration of what he means by the term comes from one of his earliest works, in which he uses wood instead of metal. Several small-scale sculptures, planks of wood with burnt and punctured patterns, are deceptively simple but communicate layers of ideas. The worked surfaces of the wood, an iconic material of art from West Africa, relates to scarring patterns that appear on human skin and in traditional African sculpture. The planks therefore represent Africa itself, continent, people, and culture. These forms can be endlessly interchanged on the aesthetic whim, but they also carry a punch. In the shifting of divided forms, Anatsui consciously harks back to the Berlin Conference of 1884, when European powers sat around a table, portioning out the African continent. In April 2015, the Venice Biennale announced that it has awarded Anatsui the Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement, a prize that acknowledges not just his recent successes internationally, but also his artistic influence amongst two generations of artists working in West Africa.